The first question always comes up is why make websites accessible? Sometimes you hear it's the law. Well, I think it's a little deeper than that. Anyone should be able to participate to society. I think that's the main driver. And this also includes people with disabilities, and even it's a human right. The United Nations has a couple of years ago published the Convention on the Rights of persons with disabilities. So it is something that you should want, not because it is mandatory by law, but it is the right thing to do. Well, but still, there is a lot of technological things involved with that. You have to conform like to a standard. And in the Netherlands, we started with that in 2006, after questions from Parliament. So conforming to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that is what WCAG stands for, is mandatory since 2006 for websites from central government and since 2008 for all websites from government. But the interesting thing is it is mandatory, but it was not based on a law, only on administrative agreements. So we have been dealing with accessibility for many years, but only since September we are doing this as a legal obligation, just like many other European countries. Well, did it work? It was mandatory, but there were no sanctions if you did not fully conform to the law. Well, it worked reasonably well. There were no sanctions, but it did work. A very important factor in the Netherlands was that in 2006, Dutch Parliament started asking questions about web accessibility of government websites. And since then, every year we have informed Dutch Parliament about the progress that is made. That has made a big difference. So I think if one important lesson from the past that we learned in the Netherlands is that if supervisory organization, which the Parliament is aware of web accessibility and starts being involved, then you see changes happen. Another interesting thing is, by the way, is how did we do? Well, there was a benchmark in 2015, that's like 5 years ago, but that showed interesting results. Maybe I can, no, I cannot do that, sorry. Here you see the benchmark. There were like 1,065 websites. And if you look, about 8 of those who scored the maximum were Dutch websites. So I think compared to other countries, we were doing pretty well, which does not say that we were doing really well. There's a lot of work still to be done in the country. And we don't think that we are like, we are there already. Yeah, this is the directive that we have all been confronted with since 2 years. We have to meet the European Web Accessibility Directive. And I want to highlight one article from the directive, and that's Article 4. That states the requirements for accessibility of websites and mobile applications. And this is really interesting. Member states shall ensure that public sector bodies take the necessary measures to make their websites and mobile applications more accessible by making them perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. I think this is the core of the whole directive. Take the necessary measures to make websites and mobile applications more accessible. This is what government organizations should do, public sector bodies. Yeah, how did we translate that into practice? I think the core is think necessary measures. Not only the website itself, but what is on an organizational level necessary to make accessibility happen. I have arranged a couple of questions. If you have no idea how accessible your website is, just have the website's accessibility evaluated. If you have no budget for improving accessibility, claim budget. That will cover the cost of complying with a obligation that is now legal. If management is not sufficiently involved, you can develop an accessibility policy plan, set goals, and have that plan formally approved. That makes a big difference as well. Also, if the knowledge of web accessibility is insufficient, well, let team members follow a training. If an evaluation report reveals shortcomings, well, you can for each shortcoming describe the cause in the accessibility statements, the effect on persons with disabilities, the necessary improvement measures that can be taken, and make a planning when those improvements will be implemented. And very important, don't forget, continue with taking necessary measures until the website is fully accessible. It's not a project, it's a process. You cannot stop until you're fully accessible. Well, about accessibility statements, I already mentioned those. In the Netherlands, the target group are not the general public. For them, you can make a more user-friendly accessibility statement. The European model is not very user-friendly in my perspective, but it's the supervisors, those who oversee whether or not the accessibility goals are being met. The statements that we have are based on the model from the European Commission, and we have built an accessibility statement wizard to make that process as easy as possible, because setting up an accessibility statement based on the model proved to be rather complicated. The statements are centrally stored and also centrally published. That gives us a lot of data about the state of accessibility in the Netherlands, and I think that's a really interesting. At any given moment, if someone asks me, how are we doing, then within 5 minutes I can send them a full report with the answer how we are doing from that moment. In the statement, we have added 4 things. There were like 3 compliance statuses. The first one was fully conforms. The second one was partially conforms of compliance, sorry. The third one we have added was first measures taken, and the fourth one was not compliant at all. We thought that the step between not complying and partially complying was a little too big, so we added this status. Another one was that conformance claims, partial conformance claims and full conformance claims must be substantiated by an accessibility report. For us, this was really important because annually we report to Parliament. One of the risks that we saw was that if a responsible minister is asked questions about the status and whether it's true what he reported, then we have to be able to support on the evidence that is provided to us. If the minister has to answer, well, I don't know, because that's the information we receive from the public sector bodies, then he is at risk. He cannot misinform the Parliament. Another one that we added was that statements must be signed off by an administrator to create more involvement from the administration, from a public sector body. We added this. It's a very simple step, but we see it has pretty much effect. Okay, this was my short presentation. I think if there are questions, I will be most happy to answer those. And if you are interested in some more background information about the subject, you can follow this link.
Yeah, thank you, Raph, for your presentation as well as your story. May I have an option to pass the question over to you, actually, that comes from the audience here. And the question is about a strategy. The one thing is when the universal design should be applied to the, I don't know, mobile application, the web page or anything else. But some of our viewers are saying that probably it's much more better to think about a different strategy when you're just going to offer the web page or the mobile application within a different formats according to the specific needs for each part of the society, like switching the language from I don't know, from Dutch to English or vice versa to French. So probably it's also the way how to proceed with that. What do you think?
Well, we see web accessibility as fulfilling an obligation for people with disabilities. So we adhere fairly strictly to the web content accessibility guidelines, having and every distinction between people with and without disabilities should not be there. I think that's really important. Having like switches in language, I think that's a good thing, but it's not mandatory by WCAG itself.
Okay. But have you had guidelines for all public institutions when they started just to develop their web pages, their mobile services, then everything that they just do? Or every institution did it by their own? Or what was the way? How you decided to do this in Netherlands?
Yes, we have started with developing like an infrastructure for web accessibility, or maybe even an ecosystem, because it was also outside of government. One of the biggest challenges in the beginning was no knowledge and no skills about web accessibility. So we have invested in that, and we have been fostering that for like the last 15 years. And we have seen that there is a lot of experience now in the field. So web accessibility in itself, a lot of organizations are familiar with the subject, but how to do it, that's only the technical part, but how to organize it, I think that's something else that is more complicated than making websites accessible in themselves. So we have been investing lately on involving the key stakeholders within organizations, and that's the management of organizations. I think they are very important to have them in board, to involve them. Simply, if they are not involved and if they only see web accessibility as a technical problem, then it's transferred to technical specialists. And but it's also their responsibility to make accessibility of websites better than it is right now, and they should feel that responsibility as well. So I think that's invest in knowledge and involve the key stakeholders. I think those are two very important steps.